the storm, riders on the storm. Into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown. Like a dog without a bone, an actor out alone, riders on the storm. There's a killer on the road, his brain is squirming like a toad. Take a long holiday, let your children play. If you give this man a ride, sweet family will die. Killer on the road, yeah.
Hello, everybody. Today we have Hugh Mills back for part 2. So I suggest that you watch part 1 first. So Hugh, we were just talking off air, and I think it would be really good for the people listening and myself if you could tell us the differences in flying a Loach to a Cobra attack, helicopter. And I think last time we talked about what the role of the Loach was, that you weren't meant to be engaging the enemy, even though that you had added extra armament, that the Cobra, that was the kind of the heavy hitter of the two. So can we talk about the differences then between the two of them?
Sure. The OH-6 to me, I've always described as a 59 MGA. Had one of those in college, loved it. Very fast, very maneuverable, very basic. Cobra, a whole different ball game. I went to Cobra school, the instructor pilot's course in 1971, en route to my second tour in Vietnam. And essentially the Cobra is the 80% or so of the components of a Huey went into the production of the Cobra. They simply slimmed it down. 36 inches at the waist, 42 inches at the bubble head on. Much more advanced rotor system, hydraulic system. The Cobra had a stability control augmentation system, or SCAS. Later versions had a climate control system that would actually blow ice crystals out on you, so you could be very comfortable in a very hot environment. It was an enclosed canopy. Greenhouse effect, they got hot. They got very hot. The original Cobras had blue plexiglass or perspex canopies. Those were difficult to see out of at night, so they were changed to clear. Rocket pods, miniguns, 40 millimeter grenade launcher. Later on when I went back to fly Cobras, I principally flew a 20 ship, a 6-barrel Gatling gun, 20 millimeter on the left inboard wing, with ammo pouches on the side of the aircraft. Very accurate. The 20 was extremely accurate, pinpoint accurate. The rockets were area fire, but with the higher your angle of attack, the tighter your circular error probable would be, you could hit really whatever you were shooting at. Multiple kinds of rockets, 10-pound, 17-pound, smoke rockets, CS, gas rockets, 6-pound heat, high explosive anti-tank, which we didn't generally use. Usually 10-pounders and 17-pounders is what we used. Nails, flechette rockets. That's what blew me down, as we discussed the last time, was a pod full of flechette rockets blew up. Very fast, faster than a Huey. Tremendous aircraft. I like the Cobra a lot. Having flown the Scout my previous tour, I was able to get inside the head of the guys that I was covering and would watch what they did. I liked a low gun position at 650 feet. over a scout that was on the trees. The bad guys would look at me. They'd see the Cobra. They wouldn't pay attention so much to the Loach until he was on top of them. But if I saw the tail of the Loach flare up in the back, I knew he had pushed the cyclic forward. I knew he had seen something. And before he even started to talk, often I was able to put rounds underneath the tail, knowing that he was over enemy troops. But complex aircraft, heavy aircraft, nimble for a big aircraft like that, and very fast. And the bad guys, the NVA, were terrified of it, because if you're flying a heavy hog with four 19-shot pods on it, you can bring a lot of heat. I didn't like heavy hogs. They were too heavy, too many rockets. I flew what I call the light scout. My aircraft had twin miniguns in the nose. I didn't like the 40 millimeter. I was not a fan of that. Too slow, too arcing on a trajectory. I like the twin miniguns in the nose. I like the 20 millimeter on the left inboard, and then two 7-shot pods outboard and one inboard on the right side with 7-shot. That was just my personal preference for an aircraft.
So would your armaments that you took with you on a mission, would that change, or did you always have the same kind of package, with the rockets? And I mean, if you were going
the aircraft were set up, we didn't change out ordnance.
You didn't? Okay.
An aircraft was either a hog or it was a light scout. Some had minigun and 40 millimeter grenade launchers in the nose turret, TAT 101, 102. Whatever they were set up as, you could change it, but generally the aircraft stayed with the same configurations that they were in. 20 ships stayed 20 ships. Heavy hogs, normally the heavy hogs were not in the air cav units. ARA, call sign Blue Max, those guys had heavy hogs. They also flew at altitudes often that required oxygen. We used to kid those guys about being so high, while all the air cav guys were low, but that was just funning with them. But most of the air cav Cobras were light scout, 2 heavy pods and 2 light pods.
And so in the event, if you're in a Cobra and you should crash and you were like, right on flat on the ground, is it hard to get out of a Cobra as long as there's no damage? I mean,
I've only done it once. So
right.
Later Cobras, which I flew at Fort Hood and later on in Germany, the S model, the anti-tank model, we had explosive canopies. We could blow the canopy. There was a charge that was intermingled with the canopy itself, and there was a device on the console that you could reach up and turn it, and it would literally blow the canopy to get out of it. The ones in Vietnam didn't have that. In mine, the canopy was broken when I crashed and I fell through it. We were on our side, and when I unhooked my seatbelt, I didn't realize I was upside down, and I fell through what was left of the canopy. But the Vietnam versions carried a thing called a breakout knife, a little short, stubby knife that was up on as I recall, up on the right side in the back and in the front. Little short, hard knife, and you could hit the canopy and bust it.
And so when you're in the Cobra, that you have a man in the front seat. Now, if you were injured being the pilot, could he fly it at all?
Yeah.
He could.
Yeah, he was a pilot. Just generally the newer guys rode the front seat.
Oh, okay.
The position is called a co-pilot gunner. So he handled the turret, and he was another pilot, warrant officer, captain, lieutenant, could have been anybody, but you can fly from both positions. The rear position of the Cobra has routine controls just like a Huey. You got a stick between your legs and a collective for the pitch control on the left side. In the front seat, it's an offset controller, a little short, stubby hand grip that's on the right console, and a little short, stubby, boosted collective about 6 inches long on the left side. For guys that are familiar with the F-16, it's a side-mounted controller like an F-16 fighter. Harder to learn to hover that thing because the throw you've got, the axis of movement, is very limited. It's hydraulically boosted, so it's not that hard, but it's totally different than what most helicopter pilots are used to, and it takes a bit of doing to get comfortable in the front seat. Instructor pilots spend most of their time in the front seat, teaching guys in the back seat, giving check rides and familiarization rides and all that sort of thing. But one other version of the Cobra called a TH-1G had a longer collective in the front and a hydraulic boost that would give you some authority over the backseat controls. Without that, the guy in the back seat can override the guy in the front seat. The mechanical advantage and hydraulic advantage is certainly in the back seat. So if somebody got weird on you and froze up on the controls, you couldn't override it unless you had a TH.
So on that note, I mean, is it much like anybody who's on the ground, even though you've done all the training? I mean, were there times that pilots froze in combat and just simply
I never saw it.
No.
I flew with a lot of guys. I had one guy. I've got to mention Lou Brewer. I mentioned him last time. Lou was killed at Anlock. He took a missile SA-7 and knocked his hydraulics out, and he went in. But before that, he was my front seater a number of times. And Lou was a huge guy. We called him Animal. And he was climbing in the Cobra one day at Camp Evans, and he reached up and grabbed the strut holding the front seat canopy open and ripped the front canopy off the airplane. That's where he got the nickname Animal. I would have to tell Lou on occasion, I'd roll in on a target and I'd say lean left or lean right because he stuck up into my gun sight. And he'd do this and I'd shoot, and he'd do that and I'd shoot. But I never had a guy, none of our guys ever froze up. Some had 1,000-yard stare, and
Right.
one guy, I'm not going to call his
Yeah.
name. He's dead now, but one of my guys actually read the Bible in the front seat while we were flying around. If it made him feel better, that's okay with me. It didn't bother me. But when he had to pull a trigger, he'd pull a trigger. So no, I never saw anybody freeze up.
Yeah. The reason I ask you is because one of my friends, saw a guy, they got dropped off in a zone in an AO, and the team leader, he couldn't find him anywhere. And then he found the team leader hiding, with his rosary beads, and he was of no use to the team. So my friend had to take over the team, and I believe that was that man's probably last mission out because
Well, I think it would be. Yeah, guys sometimes reach a point. Scout pilots, the scout position was a voluntary position in
Oh,
all
really?
the units that I was in. If you didn't want to fly scouts, you didn't have to fly scouts. It was obviously the most dangerous flying job in the air cav, from my perspective. And I've had guys that flew scouts for 3 months, 6 months. A lot of guys at about 6 months want to go back to flying Hueys. Not many of them wanted to stay the full 12-month complement. Rod Willis, my dear friend, stayed the full time as a scout pilot. Bob Davis, Wesley Reese. Most of my guys, 80% of my guys from my first tour flew scouts the whole time. They liked it. They liked the aircraft. They liked the mission. Certainly exciting. A lot of things going on that low, that fast, that close to the ground and enemy contact. But guys flew scouts because they wanted to fly scouts. You didn't get there any other way.
So changing the topic a little bit, during your time or your tours in Vietnam, did you ever come across any CIA pilots for Air America that were flying operations?
Actually, I did on my third tour. First tour, never saw any Air America at all. Second tour, didn't really see Air America. Third tour, I did. I was at Canto in the Delta. And as luck would have it, one of my guys from first tour, who I talk about in my book, Low Level Hell, his name was Ed Innabo. Ed's still out there somewhere, annoying whoever he's with, I'm sure. But Ed showed up at Canto on my third tour, and he was flying for Air America, flew Hueys, and he came over to our hooch one day, and those guys weren't allowed to carry weapons,
Yeah.
and he was concerned about that, and he goes, "I need a weapon. What do you got?" Well, we had tons of stuff.
Yeah.
I said, "What do you want?" And I believe I gave him a Swedish K. Or an M2 carbine. One of those two, he liked that and he could conceal it, I guess, or whatever. But he wanted a gun, and we fixed Ed up. Ed was a scout pilot in '69 and wound up flying with Air America. And then I know he went on to operations in Latin America with other three-letter organizations.
Agencies. Yeah.
And he's retired now somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. But
Oh,
that's
no.
the only time I ran into Air America was in the Delta.
So going back to the Cobras, are there any missions that stand out for you? I mean, ones that are not in your bio that you sent to me that maybe you could mention. I mean, or here's a question for you: if you were going in on a mission, how many of you would be in a Cobra? I mean, are you flying in a formation of 2 or 3, or what would be
It depends. It depended on the time in the unit. In Dark Horse in '69, it was 1 Loach and 1 Cobra to form what we call a hunter-killer team. When I came back from my second tour in I Corps, working out of Quang Tri out west along the Laotian border in the A Shau Valley, we flew in a heavy hunter-killer team, which was 1 Scout, 2 Cobras, a Huey CNC high with arrow rifle aboard to act as a rescue team. We were not in 71, end of 71, 72, putting guys on the ground from the arrow rifle platoon. So generally our Hueys would have 3 arrow rifles aboard that were all geared up with snatch rigs and rappelling gear, and they would come and get you if you went down. We wore Swiss seats when we flew. So
Really?
if we had to get snatched, they'd drop us a rope. We'd put a carabiner on the rope and off we'd go. We actually practiced. The Hueys would pick up the Cobra pilots on a 150-foot rope and fly us around Quang Tri, and they took great delight in going out over the South China Sea and dunking us in the water and then bringing us back. Hueys have such limited senses of humor that they have to do that sort of thing. But the Cobra mission that I was flying west of Khe Sanh when I got a message from an Air Force FAC that said I'm west of Khe Sanh in Laos. I've got trucks on the road. I've got some of them burning, but I've run out of fast movers. And is there anybody that can come shoot at these guys? And I brought my Scout up to altitude, and I had the Scout and the Huey circle over Khe Sanh, and my wingman and I believe it was Bob Smith, but I'm not positive, went into Laos to shoot this truck convoy for this Air Force FAC. And we did that. We had a bunch of trucks burning and did a lot of damage to them. When we got through and were expended, we're coming out of Laos, and I looked out to the east, and here comes about 5,000 feet. Here comes a Huey that was not one of ours. And we actually passed. I had called Bob Fairchild, who was our unit operations officer when this thing all started. And I gave him a grid. I said, here's the grid where we're going. And he did it on the map and saw that it was in Laos. And he said, check your grid, which was a nice way of telling me, give me another grid that's not in Laos. So I gave him a grid right on the border. I said, correction, here's the grid. And as we're flying, I see this Huey, and it passes me. And this voice on the radio on our UHF frequency said, Cobra's over at Quezon, your call sign. And I popped up and said, this is Charlie Horse 38 with a Cav team, expended, headed home. Didn't say anything else. And so we landed at Evans, and I came up on Victor to my wingman, and I said, he used a call sign. I think he said Red Devil 5 or Red Devil 6. And I'm sitting on the refueling pad at Camp Evans, and I'm talking to Bob Smith on the VHF, and I said, who in the heck is Red Devil 5? And this voice through our VHF internal Cobra gun platoon frequency said, I am your assistant division commander. It was Brigadier General David Hill, who had commanded the 5th Mech Brigade in Vietnam. When they stood down after Lam Son, he came over to be the assistant division commander of the 101st. And so the minute I got back to operations, Bob Fairchild grabbed me and he goes, General Hill wants to see you in his office. So I got in a Jeep and I went over there, and it was not pretty. I was a captain, and he said, what were you doing in Laos? And I told him, I said, we got bad guys on the road, and the FAC asked for help, and I went. And he goes, you're not supposed to be in Laos. And I said, well, nobody actually ever told me I couldn't go to Laos. And that was not the answer he wanted to hear, but I got thoroughly chastised. And about 6 weeks later, I was up working on the DMZ, and in the middle of the demilitarized zone, the North Vietnamese had a huge garrison-sized flag. It was huge, and it was in the DMZ. And I looked at that dang thing every time I was out flying. And one day I was with a senior warrant officer named Mac Cockrell, and I said, Mac, let's go down low. Let's zip around the DMZ into North Vietnam. Let's attack the garrison flag from the north. It was heavily defended. I said, let's hit it from the north and just keep going hell-bent for election southbound and just let them know we're here. And so we did that. We went around the rock pile and into North Vietnam, and then coming down the road 140 knots, salvoed on the flag and just kept going. And we landed, and as we landed, Fairchild came out to my aircraft, and he goes, what in the hell did you just do? I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the Marines at Charlie 2 just called 101st Airborne Division and said 2 Cobras just attacked the garrison flag out of North Vietnam. And not 5 minutes later, General Hill's office called and said, when Captain Mills lands, send him back to my office. He didn't have to ask who it was. He knew who it was. And the second time, he was not nearly as genteel as he had been the first time. It all worked out. But years later, I'm on a flight going back to Fort Hood, Texas. I'm in uniform, Rio Airways, little commuter airways, and there was a guy sitting to my left in the aircraft in civilian clothes. Thought I recognized him, couldn't really tell. And we're standing at the baggage claim. I'm standing with my wife, Sharon, and waiting for my baggage. And this guy walks over to me and noticeably looks at my uniform to see my name tag. And I was a captain in the gun platoon at 2nd Armored Division. And he said, Captain Mills. And I looked at him. I said, sir. He goes, Lieutenant General David Hill. He said, I'm your new 3rd Corps commander. And he said, what are you doing now? I said, well, sir, I'm the gun platoon leader in 2-1 Cav, 2nd Armored Division under General Patton. And he said, you're in Cobras again. He said, can I trust you this close to the Mexican border? And I said, yes, sir, I assure you I will not go to Mexico and shoot anybody. But that was probably the most humorous Cobra story I had. The first time I thought was totally legitimate. The second time I probably shouldn't have done that, but I did it anyway. So there you go.
Well, I mean, I can just imagine his face, going, oh my God, like, did he really fly to North Vietnam? Well, That's a
Well, the damn Marine Corps ratted me out. If they called and said the two Cobras just attacked the garrison flag out of North Vietnam, and if they hadn't done that, nobody would have known any different. Um, the, um, the rules were a lot looser then. We did some things in combat that probably will absolutely would get you fired these days. We stole an entire pallet of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer from the Navy at Da Nang in a Huey. We went to Da Nang on a PX run, and as we landed, a CH-46 came in from offshore with a cargo net full of Pabst Blue Ribbon. It was a whole pallet of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. And they put the cargo thing down and set the CH-46 down. The crew went somewhere else. We did our PX run, came back. It was me flying and a Huey pilot flying, and the Pabst Blue Ribbon was still sitting there. And I asked the crew chief. I said, "Will this H model lift that cargo net full of beer?" And he said, "Oh yes, sir. That's not a problem." And I said, "Well, I'll pick it up to a hover. If you'll stand up on that cargo net and put the donut over the hook, I'll do a hover check." So we did that. I landed as Charlie Horse 38. When I picked it up again, I gave them a different call sign. I gave them Dean, which was an administrative unit call sign. I did Dean 123 or something, and we got a good hover check, and the crew chief climbed up on the skid and got back in there, and we departed present position from the ramp southbound, and then did a frequency change request, QSY, Dean 123 southbound. We went out to the beach, turned north, and headed back toward Quang Tree, and I went back to flight following as Charlie Horse 38, and we got back to Quang Tree. We drank Pabst Blue Ribbon for 3 months after that.
That's
The
funny.
reason the Navy brought it ashore is because the cans had become rusted.
Oh, okay.
And the Navy, God bless them, the urbane folks that they are, they couldn't have rusted beer. We would take any beer we could get, and it was free. And so we took it.
So you kind of did them a favor in a way.
Well, I got rid of their trash for them. We stole the water cooler from the officers club at Da Nang, the Air Force Officers Club. So our gun platoon had an electric plug-in water cooler, had the big glass bottle on top.
Yeah.
We had the only cold water in Charlie Horse. We had a wonderful hooch maid that would go down and fill it up for us at the potable water point. And one time, early September of '71, she was home having a baby, and she sent her 14-year-old daughter to work for her, who did not speak English at all. And we found out, much to our chagrin, that she didn't know the difference between potable and non-potable. So when she went down to fill up our water, she filled it up with the non-potable site from water from the Quang Tree River. And within a matter of days, the entire gun platoon had amoebic dysentery, which sounds awful. It's even worse if you gotta fly.
Oh,
We had emergency missions, and you'd shoot rockets, and as you pull out, there it goes down your flight suit leg. The hooch mates were mad at us because our flight suits were nasty. The crew chiefs were mad at us because the aircraft were nasty. And we were just sick as dogs. The whole gun platoon was down with amoebic dysentery. And I remember the flight surgeon filled us full of kaopectate powder, tons of it, and some kind of antibiotics to kill the amoebic problems that we had. But I think that's the sickest I ever was in Vietnam, was when we got a hold of bad water. But otherwise, the food was terrible compared to the Navy or the Air Force. The food was just awful. We ate powdered eggs and rubber bacon for breakfast with the enlisted guys at their mess hall. At noon, we had a sea ration meal. And in the afternoon, we would eat at our own little O Club, officers club, where we had hired a couple of Vietnamese gals to cook for us. and they cooked what we could get. And a lot of what we got was traded for front seat rides in Cobras or left seat rides in 086s. You could take a Cobra to the ration breakdown point at Canto, and or the any of the supply folks, if get them to come out and ride in the front seat of a Cobra and maybe shoot a few rockets, and they give you anything you want, cases of steaks and lobsters. And if you didn't do that, we wound up eating freeze dried roast beef for months at a time, waxed green beans, powdered potatoes, and freeze dried roast beef. It was just horrible. But if you go out and give some guys some rides, which was patently uncalled for, you could get steaks and lobsters and frozen cut French fries. It was a project that flying those kind of aircraft would give you some benefits for.
So there were some people there that ate well. It was just not everybody.
Oh, the Navy. I got to tell you, on my first tour, there was a USS Corpus Christi Bay was in the Saigon harbor. It was an Army depot maintenance ship. If we needed parts, the guys would fight to get the parts run to the Corpus Christi Bay, and you would always want to get there about 11. And then you could go eat in the mess hall on board the ship, which was terrific. If you were anywhere near Saigon, the officers' clubs, any of the Air Force bases, first rate, chow. Ours just sucked. Army food in the field sucked. When you look forward to a sea ration meal over what you're going to get for supper, that gives you an indication of. And our food was way better than those poor guys in the bush. So we slept on clean sheets, and we had we didn't have running water, but we had gravity, water in fuel tanks that we would heat with Marmite heaters and immersion heaters. And we lived pretty decent compared to the guys in the field, but the food was not great. You had to leave home to eat something decent.
And would you be able to go, like you just, I guess that you already answered the question, but if you went to an Air Force mess, could you go to a different branch and go and eat there? Like if it was an Air Force base?
Oh, yeah. We cruised into Cu Chi. We had to dodge a really bad thunderstorm on one mission, and the Cobra and the Loach, we diverted over to Cu Chi. And we went to the officers club over there, and we had our crew chief, Jim Parker, was with me, and I happened to have a flight jacket in the Loach, and I said, put this flight jacket on, and we had 2 Cobra pilots and 2 Lieutenant Millses that walked in the officers club, but yeah, we would on my third tour. Out of Canto, we used to love to go. There was a New Zealander base at a right on the border called Chilang, and it was a New Zealand run basic training battalion training ARVN soldiers, and their food was terrific. And we would phony up a reason to go up there to have their sergeants work on our 50 cal machine guns on the Hueys. We had Huey had a Gatling gun, M134 on one side and a 50 cal on the other. And we'd phony up a reason to go up to Chilang and let them work on the headspace and timing on our 50. And then we'd all go eat in the mess hall. They had, fried rice and steak and lobster tails. It was really, really good. But the Cav did not eat good. It was the food was not the high point of my tour.
As a sidebar here, had you heard about Chinese troops being in Vietnam or Russian advisors at all?
Yeah, we heard rumors. I will tell you, I chased a Russian aircraft.
Please tell me that one.
Probably North Vietnamese. Matt Cockrell and I were sitting in the hooch one night, and we got scrambled. Simply it said scramble west. Pamper Radar, which was located up there, Pine Tree, where we were, had a slow-moving aerial target in the vicinity of Khe Sanh. And they wanted us to intercept this thing, which we pretty sure was an Mi-2 helicopter. And I'm flying a 20 ship, and Mac has a light scout, and we're going rapidly up the Balong River Valley headed for Khe Sanh at night. And Pamper goes, your target has turned and is now headed into Laos at high speed. More likely than not, somewhere along that route, somebody saw us going and either notified this guy, who was most likely Russian pilots in an Mi-2, that aircraft were coming his way, or they simply finished what they were doing. But we never got anywhere close to them. And after Pamper said your target has now been lost inside Laos, we turned around and came home. We heard rumors of defected Americans. We heard rumors of a white American with North Vietnamese, a black American with North Vietnamese. I never saw that. That was not something that we dealt with. We dealt largely with the A Shau Valley and the DMZ. We knew, I can tell you that from September through February 71 into February 72, we knew something was coming. We knew something big was coming because of what the scouts were finding. We were finding caches of rice the size of a basketball court that were built up in the jungle, and they were pre-positioning food for the Easter invasion of April of 72. We knew it was coming. We just didn't know the full strategic aspects of it. And intelligence really, in that date and time, it only flowed one way. It flowed up. We reported stuff routinely, but very little came back to us in terms of this is what's out there and this is what's coming. So when the NVA hit with multiple divisions, they hit precisely where we had been working. We worked at Quang Tri, and the first they knew the invasion was coming was when tanks appeared on the runway at Quang Tri. And then you had the Marine guy that went out, hand over hand to bomb the bridge, and the shoot down of Bat 21.
Right.
Colonel Hamilton, the rescue of Colonel Hamilton. I mentioned that last time. The Billy Pearson, who was the number 2 PJ on my pickup, 30 January, was killed in the Bat 21 rescue. But we knew what was coming based on what the scouts were finding. Large caches of equipment, largely. Rarely did we run into tanks. In fact, I only ran into tanks my third tour, and those were all in Cambodia, up near Kampong Trok and in Cambodia, along the Cambodian border north of Chi Lang. We flew routinely in Cambodia on the third tour, north of the Cambodian Vietnamese border, and I got to shoot some tanks up there, and captured ARVN equipment, M548, 578, armored personnel carriers, an M41 Walker Bulldog, which was an ARVN tank, former U.S. They were all over Cambodia, great tank country. And I was back in scouts at that point in time. And one story that comes to mind, my crew chief, my third tour crew chief, was a kid from Sistersville, West Virginia, named Jimmy Christie. Jimmy was a Cobra crew chief who had volunteered to fly scouts because he wanted to get into it, and they got flight pay and the Cobra crew chief didn't. And we were flying up the Phnom Penh doing a river convoy, and took fire. The Cobra took fire out of a Buddhist temple, 50 caliber machine gun fire. And we flew down there and dropped a CS grenade on the outside to get some fumes inside there, and out ran about 7 or 8 Buddhist monks, all wearing the orange robes and all that. And I'm looking at them, and I knew something was not right. And then it hit me. I said, 4 of those guys have full heads of hair. The other guys are bald. and the North Vietnamese gun crew had put on monk robes and surrounded themselves with the monks, and they were running. And I asked Jimmy, I said, "Can you cut the NVA out of that bunch?" He said, "I'll do my best." He fired a burst of M60 in front of them, and the real monks just froze. And the NVA guys took off in three different directions, and Jimmy was able to pop those guys. Um, it was a good move if they had shaved their heads. I wouldn't have known, and I wouldn't have shot a monk in the first place. But three guys were in monk robes, but they had full heads of hair. Was pretty much a dead giveaway.
That's funny.
Another mission in the same general area. Um, I had our unit administration officer, who was a West Pointer, named James Craig Adamson. Wonderful guy. Wanted to kind of get into it and fly scouts and get a little more combat experience. And I was flying him one day, and we came upon a cigarette in the middle of a trail that's still burning. And I said, "Jim, if you look over to the right, that Nippopom line," I said, "the bad guys are over there in that Nippopom line." And we just spooked them because they dropped the cigarette and it's still burning. Cigarette would have burned itself out. And I said, "We're going to fly over there and I'm going to do a hard right turn and you look straight down." He was flying in the gunner position that day. And I said, when I come to a stop, you look straight down, there's going to be NVA soldiers there, and open up on them with the M60. And I did that and pull it up on the side, and he looks down, and he was as surprised as they were. There were about 5 NVA soldiers that were hunkered down around a tree. And Jim is best known now as an astronaut. He was Army astronaut number 3.
Really?
And flew the space shuttle, now retired. But this is the guy that went from flying in my back seat to flying the space shuttle. So
Wow.
I take full credit for his experience as an astronaut. That's I've told him many times if he hadn't flown with me, he wouldn't be an astronaut. So I do have a pair of his astronaut wings and a photograph of his space shuttle landing framed up in my man cave. So,
well, that's very cool. I love those stories. Just for the public, taking a bit of a rewind there, the 2 Americans that had joined the ranks of the NVA, the white guy and the black guy, they were known as Salt and Pepper. That's
yeah,
what,
we heard that.
yeah.
Never ran into them. I was never meekened on the radio. I never had anybody jack with me on the radio. Routinely from the air, if we're dealing with guys on the ground, we would ask them to pop smoke,
Okay.
but we would not tell them what color smoke to
Yeah.
pop. And then we would identify, and I can tell you a couple of times, especially flying in the Ashaw Valley, you tell them to pop smoke, and you'd get 3 or 4 different. You'd get a green over here and a purple over here, and you would never identify your own position with red. Red was always used on enemy positions.
Oh, okay. I know that some of my SOG friends said that that same thing, that the NVA would carry those different smoke canisters to try and trick the Huey pilots, right?
Yeah, I never really. I saw multiple smokes come up a couple of times, but I've heard the salt and pepper thing. I never dealt with that. Never.
Yeah.
We didn't really deal with supporting guys on the ground like
Yeah.
the ARA did. We were reconnaissance guys. We were out there getting reconnaissance for the G2 and the G3, and up, to division and corps level. So in terms of close air support, we didn't do a lot of that, except on those cases where we were working with FACs or we were working with a fire base or something that was under attack. We would fire for them. But I didn't never dealt with the guys on the ground from SOG. I did deal with LERPs a lot my first tour. A little less the 75th Rangers with the 101st. And then the Vietnamese equivalent to Hac Bao, we dealt with them a lot. They were hardcore. hardcore reconnaissance guys. That was the reconnaissance company of the 1st ARVN Division. And they were all over ICOR.
I'm sure that they were hardcore. Now, did
They
the
were.
did the ROK have the Koreans? Did they have any choppers?
The Koreans were all in 2 Corps. I never dealt
Okay.
with them.
Okay.
The rock guys, I know not only Koreans, there were also Thai. The Thai Black Panther Division was in Vietnam. There were Filipinos in Vietnam. There were Australians. There were New Zealanders. About half of the forward air controllers I worked with on my first tour were exchange pilots from Australia.
Wow.
I worked with New Zealanders on my 3rd tour. There were very few people left in country on my 3rd tour. Most
Oh, I'm
American
sure.
units had stood down by 72. And so we supported almost entirely ARVN forces in 72. And then, of course, into Cambodia, that was all reconnaissance. The Air Force was there constantly. I mean, when we flew in Cambodia, we did not wear name tags and all that stuff. I mean, but who else is flying Cobras and Loaches, you know? A lot of North Vietnamese soldiers in Cambodia. We dealt a lot with that. And if you went down in Cambodia, you had to get yourself out. We had to rescue our own guys. The closest air-sea rescue would have been out of Saigon and Benoit Air Force Base. But the facts were out there, we were out there, and we were capable of rescuing ourselves. So we did that with our own Hueys.
Now, what the public might not realize is that any military, well, let's say allied military, that you guys actually have rules of engagement, if I can say it,
Yeah.
engagement. So when you're out there flying either the Loach or your Cobra, what were your rules of engagement? I mean, if you saw,
In 1969, the unit rules were called Dark Horse rules. No women, no children. If they're not a combatant, and frankly, the areas that we flew in, they were almost, and I have to add that, all enemy soldiers.
okay,
Most of the friendly population had been moved into pacified villages, but you would still run across largely charcoal producing people. They'd be out cutting down trees to make charcoal. And every once in a while, the woodcutters, you'd run into those guys. The scout could tell you exactly whether it's a bad guy or a civilian. Cobra, you can't tell. At the altitudes that we flew, you really couldn't tell. But the scout's looking right at him. And I was flying in Cambodia one day, and I see this guy sitting by a tree, and we circled him, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and he's kind of smiling and giving the thumbs up. He's carrying an AK-47. But he's looking at me and he's smiling. I told Jimmy, I said, don't shoot that guy. He doesn't want to shoot us. And either he's lost or he's a friendly guy and he's carrying an AK-47. The bad guys wouldn't look at you. If you found
really?
bad guys hiding around a tree, they'd kind of duck their head and they wouldn't look at you. But the friendlies who did not fear us, and often people that had never seen us before, a lot of those guys never saw a helicopter till it was right on top of them for the first time. But if they didn't offer hostile intent, we didn't shoot them. We scared a lot of water buffalo with teenagers riding them, but that was not 100% on purpose. But it sure was funny to see a 1,500-pound water buffalo going across a rice dike with a 15-year-old holding on to it. But the water buffalo did not like the helicopters at all. It scared them a little bit. But we were. I am very confident that we didn't do anything bad that I personally experienced. Everybody that we shot at was either shooting at us or was wearing enemy uniforms.
Fair enough. So before we go into the last part of your career of flying, I want to jump forward because I saw something very, very intriguing is that you actually went back to Vietnam much, much later on in the mid 90s. Is that correct? And,
Yeah, 2000, well, 2015.
okay, 2015.
Yep,
And you met with your former enemy, the NVA. So
yep.
I mean, what is that like? 50 years later, and like, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. And it's a cool story. I'm working on the sequel to Low Level Hell. I'm writing the second tour and the third tour in one piece, and it's slower than the first one was because my co-writer Bob Anderson passed away some years ago. So it's just me, and I'm uh, I'm writing about the period December 71 into January 72. We lost three aircraft. 31 December, we lose Charlie Horse 26 with the full crew, shot down. Um, Rescued the gunner. Lee Denmark was killed. We lost a scout that day. That crew chief was killed. Um, and then on the 25th of January, we lose Charlie Horse 3 Zebra, and we had two guys that were killed and consumed in that crash, the post-accident fire. And then 30 January, it was me and John Bryant going down. So I'm working on this, and I call a friend of mine who was an analyst for the CIA, and his name was Merle Pibenow, and Merle has written several books on Vietnam. And I got a hold of Merle, and I said, Merle, this is what I'm doing. Do you have any way of telling me who the unit was that we opposed during this period at this specific location and these specific battles? And he said, get back to me. Give me a couple of days. So he calls me back in a couple of days, and he goes, you were dealing with the 8th Company, 10th Battalion, 241st NVA Anti-Aircraft Regiment, and the guy that shot down Charlie Horse 26 was named Pham Ngoc An.
Wow.
I said, holy mackerel, Merle, how in the world did you know that? And he goes, well, he said, come to find out, I translated their unit history for the CIA. And he said, I'll send you some documents. So he sent me their own history, which had all this in there. So I reached out to another guy who was an expat CIA guy, lived in Hanoi, and he set up a process to find the guys from that unit. And he did. He found 17 of them, including Pham Ngoc An's family. And we got with with a movie producer and some camera folks, and we went back to do a documentary, which has still not been finished. I'll finish up with that at the end. But anyway, we go over there for 3 weeks and meet with 17 members of the 241st Anti-Aircraft Regiment, the specific unit, specific guys. And we met them in a cafe in Hanoi. And we had they didn't speak English at all, but we had a translator whose father was a general in the North Vietnamese Army, and she translated for us. And the first thing they wanted to know about me as we sit there in this, 17 of them and my wife and I, and they wanted to know how old was I then, and I said I was 24 when that happened, second tour, and they were all about 18. And they were one unit formed in the same village area up near the Chinese border. They walked all the way to Khe Sanh. We happened to encounter them on the 31st of December accidentally. And one of their guys, who they were prepping for the Easter invasion, and one of our Hueys flew a little low and got shot down. So the position of uncle in the Vietnamese culture is a revered position. So they started calling me Uncle Hugh. And with the Vietnamese accent, it sounds uncomfortably like Uncle Ho. And so I was Uncle Hugh and Sharon was Madame. for 3 weeks. They treated us beautifully. There was not one bit of animosity. They had killed 8 of our guys in those 3 engagements. We had killed over 40 of theirs. 2 of those were bodies not recovered. But they were able to tell us the specifics about those 2 bodies not recovered, one of whom was African American. And they remember finding that body the next day and burying him on the side of a stream, which is now a lake. And we were able to provide all that information through an acquaintance of mine that worked in the organization that goes after recovered MIA remains. And so a little bit of solace for the families. They were declared dead at the time the aircraft was consumed by fire. But everywhere we went for that 3 weeks, they all wanted, every time we stopped, they wanted to toast me with rice wine. And that's 17 of them and 1 of me. And they'd come up to me one at a time and bring me a little thing of rice wine. And I'm drinking 17 shots for their 1. And they damn near killed me. I'm a non-drinker for the most part. I never have been attracted to alcohol. And but they treated my wife with absolute respect. We were with John Bruno, who's a award-winning Emmy or Oscar-winning producer. He did things like Ghostbusters and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, True Lies, And his wife Lori is a very tall, very pretty, thin blonde. And the Vietnamese were incredibly taken with Lori because she. One of them said in Vietnamese to our little interpreter, I asked Zoe, I said, what did she just say about Lori? And this child had said, that is the tallest white woman I've ever seen. And they just would stare at her. And with Sharon, who's also a blonde, they just treated us with absolute courtesy. And we had a great time. They've got great senses of humor. We were embedded with Chinese, or not, I'm sorry, not Chinese, but communist minders everywhere we went. There were folks at the various provinces, and they told me what we could and couldn't do. And then they would sleep and I would do what I wanted to do. They said I couldn't wear my uniform in Vietnam, and I had a jacket, Charlie horse jacket, and my cav hat. And we took a group picture at the site of the Charlie horse 25 shoot down while the 2 communist minders were asleep in the air-conditioned bus. We flew Mark Eberly, who's the director of photography on that, and a Sigma Chi brother of mine, flew his drone inside the palace at Hue. And they said, no, you can't do that. But they were watching a soccer game in the bus, and we did that. But the folks that we met, the former enemy, I have never had a grudge against those guys. I've never felt animosity. I've always thought they're doing for their country what I was doing for mine. I don't begrudge them that at all. And I found them to be delightful human beings, and I look forward. I'm actually going back to Vietnam in August with a group called Greatest Generations, and we're going to Tu Corps, the one place I have never been. And I'm going with a bunch of first cav guys, I think, which they stuck me in there, 1st Infantry Division, to raise the collective IQ of the 1st Cavalry Division. But I'm confident that's why they picked me to go. But I'm looking forward to that. Sharon's not going on that one. That trip took a lot out of her. My wife is from Miami, Florida, and she'd never been to a third world country. And once she figured out how the bathrooms work, she was not all that hopped up to go to the countryside again. But I'm looking forward to it. I love the country. I like the people. I'd like to see them move. Trade wise, the number of things that are made in Vietnam now that is just amazing. The thing I noticed when I was back last time, the thing that just stood out like a flare to me, there is no commercial private aviation in Vietnam. It's all either an airline or military, nothing else. You don't see private aircraft. You can't rent a helicopter. I wanted to rent a helicopter and fly around a couple areas. You can't do that. Commercial aviation is either an airline or there's military aviation, and that's it, which is a real shame. I think it would enhance their country to do that. But I had a great time. I had a wonderful time with those guys.
Well, I look forward to talking to you when you return from your August trip.
I would be glad to do it.
So we're approaching the hour margin, and there's no rush. But your flying didn't end when you came back from Vietnam, and you went into another hot zone that you weren't being shot at, to my knowledge.
Oh, that would be wrong. We were.
Oh, you were.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You're talking about police flying.
That
Yeah.
and also, as much as you feel comfortable about you flying in Colombia and Nicaragua, like, just if you just want to touch on that you were.
We made some well, let me put it this way. I stayed in the Army for 26 years. So I flew, I commanded an attack company in Germany, and I was the Army rep to the FAA at the end of my service, and we made some flights to South America and Honduras, Nicaragua, Colombia, that sort of thing. I won't talk about what we did, but
Yeah.
We were there, and largely support role. But when I retired, I grew I grew interested in police work, and I went through the police academy with KCPD, Kansas City Police Department, as a reserve officer, and absolutely enjoyed working the street in an urban environment. But then they found out I was a helicopter pilot, and they asked me to come out, and would I like to fly with them as well? And so I flew Hughes 300 C models for a couple of years, and then helped them in my position as the Army rep to the FAA. I was able to help Kansas City acquire 5 OH-6 aircraft from the Law Enforcement Support Office. And we got those things in and got them all set up with night sun searchlights and embedded navigation over the GPS system and all that. And I flew those things up until the point that we were able to retire the OH-6s and go after MD-500s. About the time I retired from KCPD. But yeah, I was going out to. I will tell you one story that I think was my. We would occasionally be shot at, and you could tell that they were shooting at the sound. At almost all the stuff I did with KCPD was at night, and we were out one night on a party armed on narcotics, and he was out in the middle of the street, and the police had the guys on the ground had both ends of the street blocked off, and this guy was standing out in the middle of the street, and every time we'd fly a circle, he'd shoot at us, and I'm watching him through the TSU, or the sighting unit on the aircraft, the night vision devices, and the thermal. And one of my friends on the ground was a K9 officer, and he said, "We're going to release the dog to try to grab him." And I said, "Okay, we'll watch." And I'm watching him on thermal, and I can see the dog on thermal, and the dog goes after him. And the minute the dog gets fairly close to him, we turned on the night sun, which blinded him. And the dog's first area that he grabbed was a sensitive area on the individual, and he immediately went down and surrendered. The dog had him by the altogether, and I thought that was pretty interesting. But the air unit is an extension of the ground unit. Our job was to support the guy on the ground. We had a searchlight, we had infrared, we had thermal. We could get places faster. Car chases are best done by police helicopters, not guys on the ground. We're not going to run into anybody. We're not going to cause anybody to know we're even there. With the thermal, you can follow that car wherever he goes. If he pulls into a parking lot with 100 cars, you can still lock onto him because of the heat from the car. And I had a wonderful time doing it. And I was flying for the most part OH-6s, which was the same thing I'd flown on 2 tours in Vietnam.
I'm sure
The only difference, we had a different engine. We had the C-20 versus the C-18, and we had high skids, to accommodate the night vision systems and the searchlight. But other than that, it was the same OH-6 I was used to flying.
I'm sure that you told your fellow aviators and police, well, if I had my old chopper, I'd be able to fix this problem pretty quick, right?
Yeah, well, we talked a lot about wouldn't it be nice to put a minigun, but that's a bit of a stretch. It's humorous to think about it, but I was never in a situation where you really could justify that sort of thing. We carried sidearms, but and we practiced with the SWAT guys, putting a sniper in the back. There are places in an urban environment where a sniper, a bad guy, can get in, and where, if you remember the Texas University of Texas tower shooting, we practiced on a number of places in Kansas City to put our sniper above that potential sniper where we could get a shot at them if that ever happened. It never did while I was there.
Wow.
But the helicopter is a tremendous tool for the guys and gals on the ground, and especially car chases. It really removes so much of the liability. As long as you're chasing them, they're going to run. And if you break the chase off and the helicopter's still up there blacked out flying, we chased a guy 40 miles one night north of Kansas City in a stolen 5-liter Mustang, and he never knew we were there. And we chased him until finally the state police up north of St. Joseph, Missouri, got him because he blew his engine up. But he never knew we were there the whole time. We stayed with him 40 miles away. And then we had to turn around and get home for gas because we outflew our gas allotment.
Wow. Well, thank you, Hugh, for spending another hour with us. I've really enjoyed hearing. I mean, I almost feel like I could fly a Loach now, or Huey, but from all the things that you've told us. So maybe when you get back from your next trip to Vietnam, that we can chat some more. Maybe you'll have some.
I'd be glad to. And I gave you a name, Ken Snyder.
Right. Yes,
who
you did.
Also was a Dark Horse 1-6 on his second tour in Vietnam. He was a scout pilot with me in Dark Horse. A wonderful guy, but he was one of the few commissioned officers that was a 1-0. And I've let you have his info, and I look forward to you talking to Ken. He's a great soldier, and also ended his working career with the Federal Aviation Administration. So.
Yes,
a pleasure. I'll be glad to come back and see you.
Yes, I look forward to talking to him. I wanted to show him these two first, just so he knows who I am, But yeah. So for today, we'll conclude this. Thank you again. Don't go anywhere because I want to talk to you for a minute. And thank you.
All right, folks. Thanks for having me.